took a closer look at the contexts in which the phrase has been used, we found that it varied very widely. So cooperative federalism has been used by central and state governments to talk about issues as varied as urban housing, labor welfare, and even the celebration of International Yoga Day. So this actually prompted us to take a closer look and engage in a more critical way with the notion of cooperative federalism to see whether it was merely a useful political slogan or whether it could be seen as an important normative framework in which to look at center-state relations, or whether the answer lay somewhere in between these two extremes. The answers that we found with regard to work on cooperative federalism in India were fairly general in nature, so we thought that the way forward for us would be to look at 20 specific contemporary issues of center-state relations and apply the notion of cooperative federalism to these to see if they could be applied usefully in finding a way forward. And so we selected 20 issues across 4 themes, which we have discussed in our briefing book. These are the unity and integrity of the nation, or issues related to statehood and security, ideals and institutions, which look at administrative interactions within the federal structure, the operation of the economic system, which focuses on matters of public finance and financial market regulation, and the public trust, which talks about issues relating to the sharing and preservation of natural resources. We found that in some cases, cooperative federalism certainly can be of use. So for example, with large public welfare programs such as the NREGS, which requires a lot of coordination between center, state, and the third tier, cooperative federalism can provide some answers. Whereas in other situations of intense political conflict, such as the question of Delhi's governance, perhaps cooperative federalism is not something that gives ready answers at that point. So with the release of our briefing book today, we do hope that you will go through our takes on these topics and let us know what you think. When we began our work on the briefing book a few months ago, we couldn't have hoped for a more expert gathering than the one we have here today, especially our speakers today, Justice Reddy and Srikrishna, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, and Dr. Ashok Ganguly. Justice Srikrishna is an Indian jurist and former judge of the Supreme Court and has also headed a number of critical commissions, including the Commission on the Bombay Riots, the 6th Pay Commission, the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission, and the Committee on Telangana, several of which have posed very important questions in determining the future of India's federal character. Dr. Y.V. Reddy, of course, has served as the 21st Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and was awarded the Padma Vibhushan in 2010. More recently, he also played the role of chairman of the 14th Finance Commission, which hit the headlines for recommending an unprecedented increase in the share of taxes from center to state. We are confident today that their insights and perspectives on cooperative federalism and on center-state relations more generally will be invaluable. We are also honored to have with us today Dr. Ashok Ganguly. Dr. Ganguly is a member of the Rajya Sabha and former chairman of Hindustan Diva. We are also extremely lucky to have him as the chairman of our board, and he has been a driving force in both Vidhi's establishment and its growths. So with these words, I invite Dr. Ganguly to give the welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm here to really extend a very warm welcome to Justice Srikrishna and Dr. Reddy. They are really going to talk about cooperative federalism. On behalf of Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, whom I've got associated because I have a deep and abiding affection for this group. And so there is nothing much more profound about my association than that. And you are here really to listen to two of the most outstanding exponents, and I compliment Vidhi for having persuaded them to be the principal speakers today. This is a unique and unusual opportunity to hear about a subject which is so amorphous that you can see it in display on the refugee crisis in the European Union, which is trying to achieve cooperative federalism. So I'm not going to take much of your time. I want all of us to support, and we hope that Vidhi becomes a principal agent to advise, to provide professional advice to the Government of India and subsequently, I hope, to the states on the extensive legal changes and reforms that this country needs, without which many of the things that we aspire for our own people are unlikely to make progress. So I wish Orgyo Sengupta and his colleagues in Vidhi all the very best, And may I now request, is Dr. Reddy going to speak first or Dr. Srikrishna? Is it all right with you, Justice Srikrishna? May I request Dr. Reddy, who is a very old friend of mine and the chairman of the 14th Finance Commission, following which this term has acquired a life of its own in India, to kindly address us.
So, as in before we hear Dr. Reddy, I think it would be apt that we release the briefing book, which is why part of the reason as to why we are here today. So, I invite Justice Srikrishna, Dr. Reddy, and Dr. Ganguly to please ceremonially release our publication on cooperative federalism, from rhetoric to reality. Thank you very much. A copy of this publication should reach you on your tables in the next couple of minutes. Now I invite Dr. Reddy to please come and share his thoughts on cooperative federalism.
Honorable Justice Srikrishna Garu, Dr. Ashok Ganguly Garu, Dr. Argya Sengupta, and friends, I had a brief exposure to the expertise available with Vidhi Center for Legal Policy in connection with the work relating to the 14th Finance Commission. I was very impressed with their professionalism and commitment. I therefore felt that my admiration for their valuable work should be demonstrated by my participating in this event to release the briefing book on cooperative federalism. I must also explain that I have to rush back for an unexpected reason, and that's why I'm speaking first, and I will be leaving. I apologize for that. This book is valuable because it addresses specific issues of contemporary relevance and suggests approaches around which discussions may take place and way forward contemplated. This book, therefore, should be of interest to a broad range of policymakers, academics, and jurists. This book itself gives a very succinct account of the concept of cooperative federalism, which is currently under debate. And Justice Srikrishna Garu, in his foreword, has given an overview of the concept, its current relevance to India, and in fact he says cooperative federalism in India is an idea whose time has come. I think the book is pretty much covering the issue, and therefore I can't add much to it. Then as far as the concept and practice in India, fiscal federalism is one important component. And therefore, I thought I could talk about this concept and the practice in India, theory, practice, etc. Then I requested my friend Govindrao to send me the literature, and after I read the literature, I found that I cannot add much to it. And therefore, I'm not talking about that also. So, between Dr. Justice Srikrishna and Professor Rao, they have already covered the subject. But then the organizers thought that they can pin me down about 14th Finance Commission, but I said I am only a co-author, therefore I cannot talk about 14th Finance Commission. So there you are, there is no subject. But still, I had an agreement with the organizers, and therefore what I am going to do is share some anecdotes in my life dealing with union-state relations, and then end up with some sort of a broad overview of what I think about it after being around for 5 decades. Of course, like many others, as a student, I read political science, constitutions, Indian Constitution, and later, while teaching, I did a bit of it, but that's not that relevant, except to say that I was not entirely unfamiliar with the subject when I joined the service. So my official exposure to this subject was way back in 1969-70, 45 years ago, as Deputy Secretary Planning in Government of Andhra Pradesh. I worked for about 6 to 7 years. At that time, we really looked to the guidance of the Planning Commission. And even as a young Deputy Secretary Planning, I had access to members of the Planning Commission. 3 members, Professor Sukumar Chakravarti, Dr. Minas, B. Venkatapaya. On specific issues, we could meet, they spent time discussing specific issues. So that's one I thought I must recall. That was the Planning Commission. We seek guidance from the state. Then, in fact, Professor Chakravarti constituted a committee, task force on multi-level planning, and what functions are most appropriate at what level of government. Because before you talk of decentralization, you should know what is appropriate. Everything can't be decentralized. So what is appropriate? If it's being more centralized, then you decentralize. If it's decentralized, it's centralized. And I was made a member of such a task force, along with director Delhi School. So there was this academic, planning commission, state working together. And I still remember Mr. Ashok Mitra, ICS, who was Secretary Planning Commission, unannounced, he dropped by in my room. And then I didn't know, typically I said like IAS officer, what can I do for you? So he said, I'm Secretary Planning Commission. So after that, I never used the word, what can I do for you? See, because every government servant thinks that only he has to do something else. So that's one lesson which I learned. Why? Now, there are also certain programs in which the guidelines were changed on the basis of the discussions, suggestions made on backward areas, on drought areas, on industrialization. But anyway, we also had lighter moments. In one meeting, Professor Minas said, planning is best in Andhra Pradesh, but development is most rapid in Punjab where there is no planning. So that sort of put me in my place. At a political level, however, there was something different. There was a Gadgil formula after mid-60s problem, there was a Gadgil formula. Under the Gadgil formula, plan money had to be distributed between different states on the basis of a formula. Once the formula came, the money followed. After that, Mr. Brahmananda Reddy, Chief Minister, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, saying that every year a lot of our officers go spend 2 days having discussions in the Planning Commission. So now that we have got the money, irrespective of what you do, I don't think there is much merit in our going there. So please send the money. If you have got comments, you also send the comments. And then later, Deputy Chairman persuaded the Chief Minister to somehow send some delegation. So I, along with 3 people, went and serviced 32 working groups in 1 day. So basically, once the money went, so that was one equation. In fact, he wrote in that letter, he said, the airfare, the airfare is unnecessary waste for our officers to fly to Delhi for having discussions with the Planning Commission. That's one, once the total formula was given. Okay, next comes, we have the emergency. And after the emergency, slightly the relations changed. So one day, Mr. Vengalrao, who was Chief Minister, comes and says, we should have planning board. So we have been saying that there is no need for a planning board. At the state level, it's not necessary. And of course, the Government of India gives money, including for machinery. So he said, Government of India will give money for 5 years, plan scheme. For the next 25, 30 years, we have to bear the expenditure. It's not worthwhile. We are opposing it. Mr. Vengalrao came and said, we should have a planning board. Why? I was in Delhi. I was told we should have a planning board. Therefore, we will have a planning board. I said, what do we do? So then my secretary said, sir, any idea about the members? I took a slip of paper, wrote down 5 names, appointed. That's it. So, okay, so sometimes when there are central schemes, this is the seriousness with which they are taken sometimes. Now let me come to the union government. In the union government, I worked in the Ministry of Finance, basically dealing with World Bank and also in the World Bank. And there is an interesting phenomena. Very often, the administrative departments, like agriculture department at the state level and agriculture department at the union level, are the same level because they want to optimize the agriculture sector. And the World Bank also is interested in that. Whereas the finance department and planning department at the state level and finance and planning at the central level will be together in taking on the administrative department. So this simple idea that union government is one, state government is one, is not the way it works. There are multiple agencies interacting. And of course, under the overall umbrella of the political equations. And also, I'm reminded of an incident. Mr. M.G. Ramachandran, who was Chief Minister, he went to World Bank when I was there, and he called on the Senior Vice President, David Hopper. And Hopper mischievously said that union government has its own priorities, Congress government. The state government has its own priorities. The World Bank will not be able to assist unless there is an agreement about a particular priority and a project between the union and the state. So how do we do that? What do we do? So MGR gave a reply, 2 sentences, that's all. And the secretary, in Tamil of course, the secretary, principal secretary to the chief minister translated it in 10 sentences. It took 10 sentences. So after we came out, the vice president said, Tamil must be the most eloquent language in the world. 2 sentences in Tamil, it took 10 to 12 sentences in English. What's happened? M.J. Ramachandran said, this seems to be a tricky question. Answer carefully, that's all. And then the secretary to the CM said, the union government has priorities, we have discussions, we have got this planning commission, planning, it all works. So basically, the point I'm trying to make is all said and done. When we deal with the external world, by and large, the union and state are on the same wavelength. Of course, one of the reasons are the constitutional provisions. But I think as far as the external world is concerned, I feel that there's not that much of a tension, and that's good news. Now I went back to the state in 1983, and we had Mr. N.T. Ramarao as our chief minister. And then first annual plan, we went for discussions, and the planning commission official said, you have to provide for ongoing projects because you have to complete them. You already have sunk cost. So in order to maximize the benefits, you have to first provide for all ongoing schemes. Then only you can take up new schemes. So we tried to explain, yes, we know the rationality, but so it became difficult, we were assertive. So ultimately I had to say, sir, if the people of Andhra Pradesh wanted allocations to be made only to ongoing projects, they would have elected the ongoing government. Their preference was for new schemes. And that is how they elected a new government. Of course, then I added that in Government of India also, there are many ongoing schemes which are starved of funds, but new projects are always taken up. So this is part of the government. So I think that settled the matter. And then, of course, we had lighter moments at a professional level, though. So this was the case with a financial advisor assessing the resources. And he told me, look, your finances are in a bad shape. Look at Tamil Nadu. Very comfortable financial position. You should learn from them. So I said, no problem, except please give us a chief minister who cannot talk. MJR was admitted in the hospital for a lot of time. I said, we have a chief minister who keeps talking. The moment you talk, you promise. Then there's an expenditure. So what can I do? So ultimately, the point is the planning commission can give an advice and don't do this, but ultimately we are answerable to the chief minister. But this, at a professional, we understand, at political level, they settle. But the change in equations became quite apparent around this time. There was a meeting of National Development Council in 1980s, and we went there. And as usual, we sent a draft speech of the chief minister in advance. There was a rumor that some politicization may happen. And therefore, in the morning of the NDC meeting, I was asked whether the chief minister, what are the chief minister's plans? So I said the chief minister was rehearsing the speech, 8 o'clock in the morning. He was rehearsing the speech. I said, he's rehearsing the speech. Good, settle. We start the meeting. And as per the tradition, Andhra Pradesh comes first. So N.T. Ramarao takes the speech, which we had given, and then puts it down. Takes another speech from his pocket, gives a political speech and walks out. 2 or 3 others also walked out. But while going, we get up and said, stay back, we stayed back. He signaled to us, we stayed back. The interesting part of it is, after 5 minutes, all the officials were asked to go out. Technically, we came to assist the chief minister, and therefore there's no need. But definitely being there would not have harmed anything in particular, but that happened. So some of these things also give signals. And of course, then we asked NTR, and NTR said that Government of India had a plan to change the order of speaking and put Andhra Pradesh last if he was likely to walk out. So this is the mutual sharing of intelligence. But whatever it is, this is the type of game that happens. Around this time, I had occasion to meet Mr. C. Subramaniam, who was Finance Minister, Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission. And I raised this subject of union-state relations and how some of the straitjacket programs of Government of India, by then Government of India were giving a lot of individual schemes, affecting the dynamism, capacity to innovate of states like Andhra Pradesh. And his argument was, yes, some states may do better if we give freedom, but some states will do worse, and therefore it's necessary for us to make sure. But it was necessary to give detailed guidelines to avoid the downside, but we are also sacrificing the upside. But at that time, it didn't strike me to explain to him that there can be competition for performance. When you are doing this, there's a competition for claiming backwardness for funds. So it didn't strike me at that time. But what I'm saying is our knowledge, our understanding itself was very different. And second, of course, it did not strike me to say that even if the priorities are determined by Government of India, the people who implement are the state governments. So if they are useless, they are useless. Whoever gives the priorities. And of course, now I could explain at that time the whole theoretical developments of public choice theory, how bureaucracy tends to build its own nest and political leadership, market for political office type of stuff. But at that time, we did not know. So even understanding has improved since then. Before I move on to my tenure at the Reserve Bank, I must mention about what Govindrao, I sent this draft to 3 of my friends, Professor Govindrao and others, and he reminded me, and I just want to quickly say, apparently, there was a meeting of this, I didn't remember this, meeting of the state finance ministers to discuss the normative approach that the union government wanted the Finance Commission to adopt. And there was a background paper. Andhra Pradesh did not participate, they sent me. And I went there, and he says, my recollection is that nobody from the finance department attended from AP. You came in, you stayed briefly, and you said that union government had no business to tell the commission what approach it should adopt. And therefore, the discussion on any approach paper on the issue was not fruitful. So that was the attitude I take to finance. Now, I'm just giving these incidents to show the dynamic. With the Reserve Bank, what I did was that having with this background, one of the things which I did as soon as I joined Deputy Governor, proposed, supported by Dr. Rangarajan and Jalan, I said every year we should have a meeting of finance secretaries. The state finance secretaries should discuss their problems. We only provide a forum. We provide a secretariat. We prepare technical papers. They can have their working groups. So that worked well, very well. At the end of it, in fact, the fiscal responsibility legislation was passed by some of the states even before the Government of India passed. So the net result was that in a way, the Reserve Bank became a fiscal advisor both to the union and the states, as a debt manager, as a banker. And Mr. Vinod Rai, who later became CAG, he was Finance Secretary Kerala at that time. And apparently he suggested to Finance Secretary in Government of India that they should have a similar annual conference of the state finance secretaries at Government of India level. Then apparently the Finance Secretary in Delhi said, no, we can't have that, because if we do that, the state finance secretaries will gang up against the union. In one of these meetings, I had requested, normally I always request CAG representative, Secretary Finance from Government of India. They used to participate. And in one such meeting, Monte Ahluwalia was there. So he was quite impressed with the level of discussions. So he mentioned to me as we were walking out of the meeting, I say, Venu, the state finance secretaries are a very bright lot. I'm very impressed. So I said, yes, state governments are more careful than the union government when they select their finance secretaries. They have hard budget constraints. So incidentally, in regard to the union cooperative banks, on which there is a reference, the RBI suggested that there should be a regulatory regime outside the RBI, but that was not acceptable to the government. There is a public announcement made by Governor Jalan. So as a second best solution, we went through this institutional arrangement. So very often we may have to think of arrangements which are second best given the legal constraints. And now comes the Finance Commission. Yes, I had given a speech in July 2012 arguing that states should have, in the new dispensation, because the new macroeconomic policies, the states may have to be empowered. So therefore, I was a little surprised when I was chosen to be the chairman of Finance Commission after I expressed such an opinion. But it's a fact that, and this was criticized by some people, but at that time the leadership, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, Professor Manmohan Singh, Mr. Chidambaram, they called me, they persuaded me. So the point I'm trying to make is that the impression that the union government tries to pick up only pro-union or anything like that. So in terms of institutional finance commission, there is a consciousness in the top leadership to maintain the acceptability of such institutions. So many people tell me that I am pro-state. No, I cannot be. I have been persuaded to become governor of the Reserve Bank. I have been persuaded to become chairman of Finance Commission. Therefore, I am grateful to union government. I am not an ungrateful fellow. Therefore, I am not anti-union government, but I may be pro-state government. Now, let me give a broad overview. And now I will be a little more serious. See, based on what I read, including in this book, my experiences and interactions, let me share some thoughts on fiscal federalism in India. And in case you want to know more about this is very general, about the 14th Finance Commission, there are 3 gentlemen sitting here, catch them, Sudipta Mandlu, Ajay Jha, and Pinaki Chakravarti. They did all the work, so they are responsible. Okay? So you take care. I'll be leaving in under 10 minutes. Now, what is my take after experiencing, studying, or whatever it is? I would give my comments in terms of what I will call constitutional context, political context, economic context, external sector context, fiscal management context, power balances, and then overall arrangements for fiscal transfers. These are the broad areas I thought I should cover. First, in the context of working with the Constitution, it is remarkable that national integration in India has been facilitated by the Union, which recognized and accepted diversity as it emerged, and asserted from time to time when it was necessary. This is reflected in the process of states reorganization since 1950. See, the point is that in Indian Federation, India had to the Indian Federation, Union government had to even design the states which constitute the Union. It's not that they only given states with whom we are dealing. Here is a thing where you have to create, design the states, reorganize the states and deal with them, which is a fairly complex process. And it has been done, yes, for a long time there are no aberrations. One, there's a reference in this book, but otherwise, by and large, I think we should accept that it has been a remarkably successful management of virtually the Union government creating a federating unit over a period. Second, so this is in the constitutional context. In the political context, there are very few developing countries, very few emerging market economies that can boast of peaceful change of political regimes in a systematic manner. Credit for that should go as much to the states as to the Union. All elections, parliamentary as well as state legislature, are conducted wholly by the bureaucracy belonging to different states, under the aegis of the Central Election Commission. Union government has no machinery of its own to conduct such operations. And the Election Commission operates through the state governments. But the fact remains that the state governments are the state government bureaucracy, which essentially conducts the elections. I think we have to recognize that. It is an excellent cooperative endeavor in preserving and managing, ensuring a success of democracy in this country. The credit should go as much to the states. Of course, I want to make a marginal comment here. The anti-defection law as it operates today, in a way, negates the representation of the states in Rajya Sabha. So when you are elected to Rajya Sabha, you no longer represent the interest of the state because you are bound with the party discipline. But it is one area in which there is a bit of an undermining that has happened. Also in the political parties, the internal governance. Normally when Reserve Bank of India or any regulator, when they recognize an entity for in public affairs or company under company law, the regulator has a responsibility to ensure that the internal governance is consistent with its objective. In the case of political parties, once it is recognized on some criteria, there is no way in which the Central Election Commission is assuring itself that there is internal democracy. So that perhaps has produced what I may call the individual leader-centric. The whole system has become individual leader-centric. So in this sense, for the rank and file, the political choices are extreme. Either you agree or you don't agree, because there is no scope for debate. So I think these are a bit of aberrations, but let's see how it goes. Now let me come to the third one that is in a way originating in the context of political context. See, while extending the promises, if you just see the election manifesto in the parliamentary elections, it is very interesting that the election manifesto in the parliamentary elections promises many things which are on the state list. And there's no debate on this. So once the Prime Minister is elected through a manifesto which promises everything that is in the state list, the Prime Minister gets a legitimacy to do that. And I think the recognition that there is a division of parliamentary elections, etc., I think that has not been perhaps adequately appreciated or even debated. Fourth, in terms of economic management, many, if not all states, have improved their capabilities to plan, allocate resources, and implement policies and programs. I know for sure the planning departments in some of the states are at least as good as the union government, because there's education, there are opportunities, expertise has been built. Unless the union government is ahead, it will not be able to catch up. So that I think that has to be recognized. In the ultimate analysis, knowledge is power. And many states legitimately claim that almost all flagships of the union government in recent years were in fact initiated at state level, in some state or other. First condemned by Government of India, and later adopted, and then finally compelled through an all India legislation. So this we have to recognize. And then what happens is, in a way, therefore, now what has become very interesting to see, earlier the planning commission used to say, this is the model, Mahalanobis model. You had all this Mahalanobis model. Now you got Bihar model, Gujarat model, Orissa model. So I think there's some message there. Okay. So in a way, the practice of federalism in India has in many ways empowered the states, despite increased recourse to discretionary fiscal transfers from the union to states. States are being encouraged to compete and to perform and deliver now by a variety of forces. Fifth, in regard to external sector, in some developing countries, especially in Latin America, and in some developed countries of Euro area, in the context of even recent crisis, subnational governments borrowed heavily, often in foreign currency. Of course, not in Euro area, but other areas. But Euro area also, it's not a foreign currency in that sense. But the point is, the subnational government's borrowing program has resulted in problems for the national government, has created economic crisis in some countries, particularly in Latin America and to some extent in Europe, Spain. Our constitutional provisions virtually prohibiting external borrowings by states ensure that we do not face such problems. Similarly, in view of the constitutional limitations warranting unions' approval of borrowing program of a state as long as it owes debt to the union government, there is some restraint on the borrowing by the states. The union has exercised its powers by and large responsibly, despite some complaints. So the fact that the states have entered into an agreement, each state, unlike the Government of India, where the public debt management is by law with the Government of India, with the state governments they have to enter into an agreement, all of them have entered into an agreement. So the RBI being in charge of the public debt also has the element of ensuring that the states are under the overall national discipline. Sixth, in regard to fiscal management, the states in general, with a few exceptions, manage their fiscal affairs responsibly, albeit with considerable support from union government, particularly in the recent past. The 12th Finance Commission, chaired by Dr. Rangarajan, laid a solid foundation for fiscal responsibility of states in general. Their fiscal management during the recent years has been, for most part, far more prudent than that envisaged by the 13th Finance Commission. Some analysts aver that in recent past, union government has taken advantage of fiscal consolidation by the states to expand union's own fiscal space. The main issue in federal fiscal relations in recent years has been the state's contention of overreach or encroachment of union government into states' functional and fiscal space. Both quantitatively and qualitatively, I believe that this issue has been significantly addressed very recently. Seventh, in terms of power balances, the states essentially under the leadership of, especially under the leadership of regional parties, the states which are under the leadership of regional parties, they perceive that the effort of the union government to strengthen the local bodies, while at the same time expanding the central sponsored schemes, is an attempt to squeeze the state governments and disempower them. That is their perception. And they suspect that a centralizing tendency in several schemes has the effect and perhaps the intention of squeezing the policy space of the states. There is considerable frustration also. I agree with the delay in adoption of goods and services tax. I share the frustration, but if you just look back where we started in terms of tax regime, 50 years back, the type of mess we were in, considerable progress has been made, and I think it's better it's done quickly, but we should not be frustrated about the type of rationalization we have done so far. Ninth, in terms of arrangements for fiscal transfers to subnational entities and their efficacy, it will be appropriate to compare our experience with other federations among emerging market economies. I think it's not appropriate to straight away say I want to compare it to USA. USA Federation is a different history, or Canada. But so if you recall, you can compare that we did Indonesia, Mexico, or Argentina, or China, Russia, or South Africa. When you do that, you will find the arrangements for transfer in these countries provide far greater discretion to the federal government than in India. Almost all transfers are discretionary. They may have some arrangement for advice, but the primary mode of transfers is grants from higher to lower level of government, and such are often discretionary. These countries do not have constitutional provision for sharing of national level taxes. Only India and Pakistan have the sharing, the others only transfers. Indian federal fiscal system has provided both flexibility and predictability. Finance Commission gives predictability. The other transfers give flexibility. So that combination is able to have a dynamic balance of vertical and horizontal in a consistent manner. So it is no exaggeration to say that India has a far more robust fiscal federal framework in law and in practice than any other comparable federation in the world. Finally, and to conclude, we in India can be legitimately proud of working of our federation that simultaneously strengthened governance capabilities of states, contributed to national integration, and enabled robust fiscal federalism, though there are several areas that need to be improved. The work initiated by the Center, by the Union Government, for by the Center for Legal Reform, see, I'm so accustomed to avoiding the word center, even this center I substitute the word union. The work initiated by the Center for Legal Reform is an excellent initiative to build on what we have achieved so far, address issues as they emerge, and contribute to the closely interrelated reforms in both law and policy. I congratulate the excellent the authors. I eagerly look forward to benefit from intellectual stimulation and debates that would be inspired by this briefing book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reddy, for bringing so much rich color into the discussion on cooperative federalism. May I now just invite Justice Srikrishna to share his thoughts on cooperative federalism and the Constitution.
Dr. Reddy, who is about to leave. No problem. Mr. Ashok Ganguly, Mr. Arghya Sen Gupta, and his band of enthusiastic workers and all friends gathered here. We just now heard a concise but excellent analysis of federalism, how it works in India from the perspective of a bureaucrat, an ex-governor, an ex-chairman of the Finance Commission, from the perspective of financial resources, financial management, and the financial interplay between center and the states. I shall look at it more from the perspective of the constitutional and legal provision and talk about three topics basically. What exactly is federalism? What is our constitution really a federal constitution? And finally, what is the way forward? These are the three areas which I'll be touching upon, because finally, the way forward should be this buzzword, cooperative federalism. Now, in order to understand what is federalism, we have to throw our minds back to a long distance backwards. It has been defined, the phrase cooperative federalism entered the dominant discourse in the United States somewhere in the 1930s. And today in India, it has become the buzzword. Everybody seems to use it, meaning, of course, different things to different persons at different times. As students of law, it behoves us to critically analyze the contextual content of this expression, this term, and then fit it into the present context. Basically, federalism is a mode of political association and organization that unites separate polities within a more comprehensive political system in such a way as to allow each to maintain its own fundamental political integrity. The basis of federalism in political theory is that there is primacy of bargaining between the different polities, and there is also negotiated cooperation amongst the different constituents by which each one of them agrees to forego a certain amount of its political sovereignty and its power in a spirit of cooperation, so that on account of dispersal of power centers, there is safeguarding of individual and local liberties. The term federal itself is derived from the Latin word fidus, meaning a covenant. Therefore, by definition, a federal relationship implies equal partnership between individuals, groups, or governments, or a cooperative relationship attained as a result of negotiations amongst the equal parties as a basis of power sharing. Federalism is more than simply a structural arrangement. It is a special mode of political and social behavior as well, involving a commitment to partnership and active cooperation on the part of individuals and institutions that at the same time take pride in preserving their own respective integrities. Professor Ware, K.C. Ware, long ago defined federal government as an association of states which has been formed for certain common purposes, but in which each member state retains a large measure of its original independence. A federal government exists when the powers of the government are divided substantially according to the principle that there is a single independent authority in respect of some matters, then that there are independent regional authorities for other matters, each set of authorities being coordinate and subordinate to the others within their respective spheres. Federalism by now has been widely accepted as one of the forms of political organizations that is strongly interlinked with democracy. Federalism can exist in the manner of sharing territory, political power, and financial resources. In a federal model, detailed methodology is worked out in respect of all three facets of federalism. United States of America is a paradigm of federalism in action. The US Constitution of 1787 was carefully crafted so as to maintain the integrity of each of the states forming the Union. The Federalist, an invaluable American book expounding political theory, expatiates on the manner in which the federal system was introduced by the US Constitution. According to the Federalist, there are three basic choices for building a federal system, and they would be by force, by accident, and by reflection and choice. When certain territory is acquired by reason of conquest, it would be open to the conquering power to enter into a covenant with the vanquished power for bringing into existence a federal system of governance. It may also happen that such a system may be the result of a historical accident or a conscious decision taken as a result of debate, reflection, and informed choice. A federal democracy implies that the polity is so designed as to ensure that there are appropriate checks and balances so that all institutions are checked and balanced by other institutions which exercise their constitutional power and are autonomous by themselves. This would be a situation where, to quote, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. In order to ensure the existence of a properly working federalist system, it is essential that there is a written constitution governing the system. The constitution would be the document embodying the fundamental rules which are agreed to a priori before bringing in the federal system into existence. Although the Constitution of the United States, which originated in the modern type of federalism in 1787, is generally believed to be the first federal system, federalism has much hoarier history. The ancient Israelite tribes that existed sometime in the 13th century had a system that could be loosely called a federal system. It is debatable as to whether such a system adopted by them was a federation or a confederation as understood even by modern day definitions. The early leagues of Greek city-states were more of the type of confederations where the ultimate authority and sovereignty rested with the constituent units, while the leagues were governed to pursue the common purposes for which they were formed. Both in the Israelist and Greek federation systems, the aim was unification of communal democracies in the larger interest in the realm of the defense. Both of them disappeared as a result of conquest by Alexander and later on by Rome. The Roman Republic, though it could formally be called federal, had an arrangement that was quite asymmetric. Rome became the federal power, and the weaker cities conquered by it were attached to it as loose federal partners, ensuring local autonomy to a certain extent, but not giving full political rights to the Roman citizens. Subsequently, when Rome consolidated its powers, although federalism remained on paper, the Roman Empire became a centralized empire. These self-governing cities, which developed in northern Italy and Germany with leagues of cities, were also established as loose confederations. Those leagues survived only as long as it was in the interest of the rulers to allow them. The provinces of Netherlands had substantial local autonomy under the Roman Empire and turned into an independent confederation sometime late in the 16th century after revolting against the Spanish king. The loose federation of United Provinces of Netherlands came to an end when Napoleon conquered them. After the fall of Napoleon, the Dutch adopted a constitution which preserved the provinces as a part of unitary decentralized monarchy, which continues to exist even today. After the Second World War, the Netherlands and their erstwhile colonies in the Caribbean reconstituted themselves as the Kingdom of Netherlands, which, though formally a federal system, provides symmetrical relationship between its several constituents. In the 18th century, I'm going back into history because history has a lesson to teach. Now you look at history, you'll understand what has happened, why have we evolved like this, and then, as somebody very famous said, if you don't draw a lesson from history, you are bound to repeat your mistakes and perish. In the 18th century, there was a rediscovery of federal theory as a result of political thinking of Montesquieu and Rousseau. The writings of these two political thinkers contributed in a large measure to the political thinking that went into the designing of the federal structure in the United States of America. The Federalists provided an explication of the political theory and extolled the advantages of adoption of the Constitution of 1787. In the 19th century, I'm coming closer now, Alexis de Tocqueville explained the strength and weaknesses of the American experience on the basis of political theories. The Germanic political theories also examined the problems of federalism in the Germanic countries and produced their expositions of the difference between Bundesstaat and Staatenbund. The French tradition, spearheaded by Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, advocated a more utopian type of federal theory that would ensure the avoidance of fundamental political conflicts which had emerged in the society during the 19th century. After the Second World War, new federations were founded and restored in Eastern Europe, like Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. Africa also had its share of federations in Nigeria, Comoros, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Asia produced federations in India, Malaysia, Pakistan, and United Arab Emirates, United Arab Republic. Depending on the strength of the political culture and contemporary political climate, some of these survived and some died natural deaths. India is one of the countries in which the constitution consciously adopts a federal structure which constitutes and continues to work till today. In a truly federal system, the constituent polities by theory must have substantial influence over the constitutional amendment process. The assumption is that the power exercised by the constituent polities is such that any serious change in the political order can only be made by the decision of the dispersed constituents, which would truly reflect the federal division of powers. This is very important both for popular government as well as for protecting federalism. Since federalism constitutes a complex governmental mechanism for governance of a country, it must have an inbuilt balance between the forces working for concentration of the power in the center and for those urging dispersal of such powers amongst the constituents. A truly federal constitution must envisage a clear-cut demarcation of the governmental functions and the powers between the center and the regions as sanctioned under the Constitution, which must be a written document laying down the ground rules of sharing power. This gives rise to two issues. A, that transgression by one level of government into the exclusive domain of the other level of the government would amount to a violation of the Constitution. And B, any violation of the Constitution would be justiciable and adjudicated by an independent judiciary within the area assigned to it by the Constitution. This is the political theory which is reflected precisely in our constitutional document. The question often debated is whether the Indian Constitution is truly federal in character. According to Professor Ware, in practice, the Indian Constitution is only quasi-federal in nature and does not conform to the test of being truly federal in nature. Sir Ivor Jennings, however, takes the view that India is a federation with a strong centralizing policy. D.D. Basu, after a fairly extensive analysis of judgments of the Supreme Court of India, took the view that the Indian Constitution is neither purely federal nor purely unitary, but is a combination of both. According to him, it is a union or a composition of a novel type. India became independent in 1947, and the then Parliament, also serving as a constituent assembly, adopted a new constitution which came into effect on January 26, 1950, establishing the Federal Union of India. The Indian situation is quite unique, with its peculiarities in terms of geographical areas, population, and the number of languages spoken across the country. The distribution of power between the center and the states under the Indian Constitution owes much to historical and political factors. It also owes much to the way in which the British ruled the country and the manner in which the British unified the country under their direct control by integrating the various principalities in the Indian Union. Although it was easy to integrate the areas directly ruled by the British, the treaties of accession signed by different independent rulers, led to the integration of different principalities with the country. When the constitution was adopted in the year 1950, Dr. Ambedkar, chairman of the drafting committee, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, both colossuses striding the political field then, were in favor of adopting a unitary system. Sardar Patel, another strong leader, however, was strongly an advocate of the federal system and played a crucial role in crafting of a federal constitution. The debates in the Constituent Assembly give an aperçu into the thinking on whether the Indian Constitution should have a state or a central bias. Answering the criticism of the tilt towards the center, Sri T.T. Krishnamachari during the debates in the Constituent Assembly on the drafted situation constitution stated as follows, and it is very enlightening, so I'll quote that portion. Are we framing a unitary constitution? Is this constitution centralizing power in Delhi? Is there any way provided by means of which the position of people in various areas could be safeguarded, their voices heard in regard to matters in their local administration? See how these questions reverberate over the years, and today these questions are being very stridently being asked in Delhi. I think it is a very big chance to take, a very big charge to make that this constitution is not a federal constitution and that it is a unitary one. We should not forget that this question, that the Indian constitution should be a federal one, has been settled by our leader, who is no more with us, in the Round Table Conference in London 18 years back. I would ask my honorable friend to apply a very simple test to, so far as this constitution is concerned, to find out whether it is federal or not. The simple question I had got from my German school of political philosophy is that the first criterion is that the state must exercise compulsive power in the enforcement of a given political order. The second is that those powers must be regularly exercised over all the inhabitants of a given territory. And the third is, and the most important, is that the activity of the state must not be completely circumscribed by orders handed down for execution by the superior unit. The important words are, must not be completely circumscribed, which envisages some powers in the states are bound to be circumscribed by the exercise of federal authority. Having all these factors in view, I will urge that our constitution is a federal constitution. I urge that the constitution is one in which we have given power to the units which are both substantial and significant in the legislative sphere and in the executive sphere. The constitution adopted in 1951 classified states into 4 categories. Provinces directly ruled by British were classified as Part A. Princely states had relationship with Government of India in Part B. Then we had states of Hyderabad, Mysore, Jammu, Kashmir, and 5 newly formed unions of princely states. Jammu and Kashmir were made subject to special powers. The remaining princely states acceding to the Indian Union in exchange for concessions, privy purses, and certain other privileges. Because the British in India and their successors, the Indian National Congress, were in extremely strong bargaining position, it rendered the relationship quite asymmetrical. In the case of Hyderabad, military force was used against the Nizam to forcibly integrate the then Hyderabad state into the Indian Union, and police action resulted in integrating the erstwhile Portuguese territory of Goa into the Indian Union. Even after independence, whenever there was assimilation of areas into the Indian Union, there was reorganization of state boundaries. As a result of the provisions of Article 3 of the Constitution, it became possible for the federal government to define the subnational territories and their geographical collocation. This was in direct contrast to the true test of federalism, where truly sovereign units cede their sovereignty under an accepted principle in exchange for matters explicitly stated in the constitutional document. Hence, it is argued that the arrangement was asymmetric because the original entities were not allowed to retain their identities as before. The asymmetric arrangement was therefore recognition of the different states of institutions and the administrative standards in the country. Jammu Kashmir was a special case and acceded to the Union under the special terms as recognized in Article 370 of the Constitution of the Constitution. J&K has been provided with its own constitution and a special assignment of functional responsibilities and exemptions from several acts of parliament. The jurisdiction of the center has been restricted to foreign affairs, defense, and communications, with the residuary power remaining with the state legislature. This is in stark contrast to the situation obtaining with regard to the other states where the center's powers and responsibilities are more extensive and the center retains the residuary powers. Article 371 of the Constitution accords special powers to northeastern states as a result of the amendments made to the Constitution, typically at the time of conversion of union territory into a state, or, as in the case of Sikkim, upon accession to India. These safeguards make special provisions to ensure respect for customary laws, religious and social practices, restrictions on ownership and transfer of lands, and restrictions on non-residents to the state. The state legislatures have been given final control over the changes in these matters. It has often been suggested that the Indian Constitution's federal structure represents a federal structure of unity in diversity. What exactly this means needs critical evaluation. In a truly federal structure, there would be a union or association of states leading to a setting up of a composite institution under which there is a separate and distinct federal government and state governments. The pattern of relationship has not been rigidly defined under the Indian Constitution. On the other hand, the inter se relationship obtaining under our Constitution has often been described as cooperative federalism, a term used by the Supreme Court long ago, with an elastic set of norms which have often been taken advantage of by powerful union governments, according to some. Federalism in India is built upon the substructure of power sharing in a parliamentary democracy, and it should ideally involve two basic features such as devolution of authority and decentralized administration, both of which were often sacrificed at the altar of strong governance at the center. It cannot be gainsaid that from the time when the Constitution was drafted, the concept of unity rather than individuality has had a marked influence in the drafting. While a truly federal state comprises indestructible union of indestructible states, it is seen that the states have never remained indestructible as understood. And for the manner in which the states were formed, reformed, and re-altered runs against this fundamental tenet. Perhaps the strong influence of Dr. Ambedkar and Jawaharlal Nehru led to supremacy of the union over the states in matters that concern national interest. The pervasive influence of the Pre-Independence Government of India Act 1935, with its pattern of distribution of legislative powers, has also shaped the drafting of our Constitution. Even under our Constitution, the longest is the list 1, the Union list, which comprises items like defense, arms and ammunition, foreign affairs, foreign trade, atomic energy, treaties, war and peace, electronic communication, currency, coinage, Reserve Bank of India, industries, natural resources. Supreme Court, to name some of the important items. The state list comprises inter alia, public order, police, trade, commerce within the state, agricultural, markets, money lending, land revenue, and various taxes. The concurrent list includes items like preventive detention, transfer of non-agricultural property, contracts, economic and social planning, monopolies, social security, education, labor welfare, factories, press control, and electricity, to name some of the important ones. Article 248, read with item 97 of the list 1, confers residuary legislative powers on the Union. A reading of Articles 245 to 255 of the Constitution makes it clear that the Union has larger legislative powers. Even in the matter of executive powers, the Constitution gives ample power to the central government to issue directions to the executives in the state governments and enjoins upon the states not to impede or prejudice the executive power of the Union. It can therefore be perhaps justifiably argued that despite the professed federal form of the Constitution, it is actually unitarism masquerading in federal form. It is true that the Indian Constitution and its political setup may not conform to the rigid test of a truly federal state. In fact, the Constitution of India does not even mention the word federal or federalism, although the preamble was amended to introduce socialist republic during the emergency, which the Supreme Court said was wholly redundant. This has led to some of the thinkers to describe the reference in the Constitution throughout is to the Union of India and the states and the distribution of the legislative and executive powers as indicated in the constitutional arrangement. This has led some of the thinkers to describe Indian federalism as flexible federalism or cooperative federalism. That is where the term originated in India. Some of the writers have argued that the failure to rigidly define the boundaries of power sharing between the Union and the states, far from being a flaw, is a virtue of the Indian Constitution, just as Dr. Reddy also said it some time ago. It is suggested, and it's always they say, whenever a child is born and it has, what do you call, it is kana, I don't know what the English word, it has squint eyes. The old lady, the grandmother would say, squint people are very lucky. This child is going to be very lucky. This is a way of trying to mollify the flaw and say that the flaw itself is a virtue. Some of the writers have argued that the failures to rigidly define the boundaries of power sharing between the Union and the states, far from being a flaw, is a virtue of the Indian Constitution. It is suggested that the reason why India has been successful is because the Indian federal system has the important attribute to flexibility. This important feature of the Indian federalism, called by some as Cooperative Federalism, with its formal and uniform rules for maintenance of the political system, as well as for peaceful change of management, has worked well in practice. While the US Constitution in its history of 200 plus years of existence has been amended only 27 times, the Indian Constitution can boast of 94, I think it's become 100 now, 100 amendments in the last 60 and odd years. Every second day there is an amendment. That it is pointed out as the strength of the system and not its weakness. The 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, resulting in the creation of a Panchayat Raj, or the third tier of government in rural areas, and elected urban bodies, is held out as an example of such flexibility which could not have been available under a rigid pattern of sharing of powers. Although the political wisdom of cooperative federalism has been much appreciated, with regard to fiscal issues, the Indian Federation has both vertical imbalance and horizontal imbalance. Vertical imbalance means the imbalance faced by the relative levels of government in their relative ability to raise revenues vis-a-vis their expenditures. The vertical imbalance is said to be more acute in the case of the Indian Federation because the taxation powers of the Union are overwhelming as compared to those of the states. The Union government has power to tax corporate income, personal income, foreign trade, manufacture and services sectors, as well as on major mineral resources. The states have a smaller taxing ability to raise taxes on income from land, sales on goods, and other local taxes such as property tax. The horizontal imbalance refers to the ability of the states to raise the revenues for meeting their expenditures. The ratio between the highest and the lowest per capita income is estimated to be 5:1. Ironically, the poorest states are also the biggest in population, and that compounds the problem of horizontal equalization. Of course, the constitutional machinery evolved by Article 280 is formation of an independent constitutional body called the Finance Commission, appointed every 5 years, which reports to the President of India and is charged with the distribution of financial resources between the Union and the states. The Commission is charged with a duty to evolve the principles on which grants in aid of the revenues are made from the consolidated funds of India and the measures needed to augment the consolidated of a state to supplement the resources of the entities in the Panchayat Raj. Several judgments of the Supreme Court have discoursed on the nature of federalism and whether the Indian polity can conform to it. Any discussion on Indian federalism would be incomplete without a reference to some at least of the judgments. In State of Rajasthan versus Union of India, the Supreme Court went on to consider the concept of federalism in theory and the extent to which our constitution conforms to it. In the judgment, the learned Chief Justice went on to say, our constitution creates a central government which is amphibian in the sense that it can move either to the federal or unitary plane according to the needs of a situation and circumstances of the case. In the good old days, one was either a man or a woman. Today, it's fashionable to call that you are the third gender. So similarly, ours can be legitimately called the third type. It was pointed out by the court that Article 350, 355, and 356 derogate from the strict constitutional principle of federalism. but that such departure from the constitutional principle of federalism is permitted by the Constitution because of extraordinary situations arising out of threat to the continued existence of constitutional democratic government. Through Article 356, Clause 1, it authorizes serious inroad into the principles of federalism enacted in the Constitution. That is permitted because in the subjective satisfaction of the President, a situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Quoting Dr. Ambedkar, the court opined that the Constitution permitted such departure so that it can move from a federal to unitary plane as the situation requires. And we all saw what happened during the emergency, how the President was satisfied about the internal emergency. The Supreme Court analyzed, this is what happens. If you don't have strict boundaries, there are only two methods by which you can carry on life. Either you have a strict separating wall and say, you shall not cross this Lakshman Rekha or whatever they call it. Or if you cross the Lakshman Rekha, then Ravan will carry away the Sita. That is exactly what happens in life. Only thing is, we say, no, you will not cross, but it will be dependent on somebody's discretion. Now, if the discretion is exercised by a wise person, we all agree it works well. But 1975 told us that it does not work well. Supreme Court analyzed Article 248 of the Constitution, which vests Parliament with exclusive power to legislate with respect to matters not enumerated in either the concurrent or state list, and opined that this was an indication that under our Constitution, the residuary power is vested with the Parliament. In addition, Parliament has overriding powers vested in it even for matters in the state list for limited durations if the Council of States by resolution supported by not less than 2/3 of its members declared that it is necessary to do so in national interest or during the continuance of a proclamation of emergency, Articles 249 and 250. Inconsistency between two laws between laws made by Parliament and state legislature on an item found in a concurrent list is to be resolved in favor of the law made by Parliament, Article 254. Far-reaching powers contained in Article 352 to 360 in Part 18 of the Constitution enable the President to suspend not only the enforcement of fundamental rights of citizens and their operation as fetters on legislative powers, but also the functions of the state legislature, which can be assumed by Parliament and of state governments, which can be taken over by the President. As the Constitution stands at present, the exercise of emergency powers can completely remove even the semblance of federal structure in our Constitution for the duration of the emergency. In the words of Dr. Ambedkar, one of the prime architects of the Constitution, ours is a dual polity, meaning a republic, both unitary as well as federal, according to the needs and times, needs of the time and circumstances. This dual polity of ours is a product of historical accidents. A genuine federation is a combination of political units which adhere rather tenaciously to the exclusion of the central authority from strictly demarcated spheres of state action. But there is a central or federal government. The extent of federalism set up depends upon this extent of demarcation in the executive, legislative, and judicial spheres. In a truly federal constitution, this demarcation is carefully crafted in a comprehensive and detailed manner, clearly specifying the limits. Our country's history shows that it was really the British who succeeded in giving reality to the objective of establishing unity of India politically and administratively. Even they preserved a duality of systems of government. There was a British India under the Governor General presiding over the destinies of various provinces under governors as imperial subagents, but all acting on behalf of the Emperor, whose government ruled from Westminster and Whitehall. And there were other parts of the country ruled by Indian princes owing allegiance to a foreign emperor whose authority they paid homage by acknowledging his sovereignty or the paramountcy or exercise to the viceroy. These two parts were sought to be knitted together into a federal polity by the Government of India Act of 1935. Federal principles, including a federal court, were embodied in it so as to bring together and coordinate two different types of political systems and sets of authorities. But after the Constitution of the Indian Republic came the gradual disappearance of princely states and the unification of India in a single polity with duality of agencies of government only for the purposes of their more effective and efficient operations under a central direction. The duality or duplication of organs of government of the central and state levels did not reflect a truly federal demarcation of powers based on any separatist sentiments that could threaten the sovereignty and integrity of the Indian Republic, to which members of our Constituent Assembly seemed ardently devoted, particularly after the unfortunate division of the country with disastrous results. Our Constitution exudes a pragmatic approach to federalism while distributing legislative powers between the Parliament and state legislatures, with a concurrent field also indicating the spheres of governmental powers of state and central government, overlaid by strongly unitary features, particularly exhibited by lodging in Parliament the residuary legislative powers and investing in the central government the executive power of appointing state governors, the chief justices, and judges of the High Court. Of course, now all that has changed. Powers of giving appropriate directions to the state governments and of even displacing the state legislatures and governments in exceptional circumstances or emergencies of not very clearly defined ambits or characters. No other federation in the world has exactly similar unitary features. It is open to debate whether such a system can legitimately be called federal in a strict sense by application of the political theory. The function of supervision is certainly that of the central government, with all that it implies. Though our Constitution runs an overall reign in the hands of the center in both the fields, Parliament has exclusive authority to legislate on matters I have already talked about. The administrative relations between center and states were largely governed by the provisions of Chapter 2 of Part 11 of the Constitution. Then I refer to Article 256. The following characteristics of our Constitution indubitably demonstrate the weak character of the federal structure and the controlling hand of the center on states in certain matters. The governor of a state is appointed. Okay. The governor of a state is appointed by the president and holds office at his pleasure. Entry 45 list 3, that inquiries shall be held by the government. Article 2 empowers Parliament to by law to admit union, establish new states. Parliament is empowered by Article 3 to make law for formation. Such is the nature of our federal structure. There are a whole lot of judgments of the Supreme Court, and I don't propose to bother you with all that, except that I'll take you to the last of them, where the Supreme Court, it talked of, in S.R. Bommai's case, that is the judgment of a large bench, a constitution bench comprising 9 judges considered the nature of federalism under the Constitution. Justice A.M. Md said, it's the significant absence of expressions like federal or federation in the constitutional vocabulary, Parliament's powers under Articles 2 and 3 exhibited, etc., show the extraordinary powers conferred. And then finally he said, all this makes one doubt whether the Constitution of India is strictly and fully federal. However, are the powers of intervention in the affairs of the states given by the Constitution to the central government and Parliament. Then finally we come to the pragmatic approach to federalism in India that was appreciated by saying an ounce of practice is worth more than a pound of theory, by no less a person than Mr. Fali Nariman in an international forum, was dismissed as having an anti-intellectual tone. The claim that Indian federalism is a paradigm of its unity in diversity was also dismissed as being more like an attempt to promote unity in the Indian diversity than to document it, on the ground that communal, regional, and caste tensions continue to haunt Indian politics. Issues like unequal size of states, disparities in economic and social development between and within the regions, and management of natural resources amid growing interdependence continue to hamper the vision of unity in diversity. The candid admission of the Prime Minister at the ICF meet that there has been distortion of a national vision and collective purpose by narrow political considerations based on regional or sectional loyalties and ideologies must be an eye-opener to all of us who pride ourselves on the country's pragmatic approach to federalism. The Indian success story has no dearth of its critics. The Republic of India, it has been said, is an ungainly, unlikely, inelegant concatenation of differences that, decades after its foundation, still exists as a political entity, says a critic. Interestingly, even the critics of the Indian system have a grudging admiration for it when they say, in short, the country poses an incomparable fact pattern which has been addressed largely by unconventional means and with widely unexpected success. The growth of mass and local politicization, and I come to the last point of what should be the way forward. The growth of mass and local politicization has thrown up a challenge to the very concept of federalism in India. The competition for scarce resources has spawned acrimonious disputes among states and between states and the center. The constitutional machinery is finding it increasingly difficult to satisfactorily resolve such disputes within a reasonable time frame. Increasing militancy and insurgency in Kashmir and in the northeast and elsewhere have rendered it difficult for the government at the center to maintain control except by use of armed forces. The strident demands for protection of local languages and culture and the demands for creation of more states and employment to more sons of soil, even by dissecting the ones formed on the basis of common language and culture, are creating problems that defy any easy solution. The very concept on political theory of federalism is poised to be tested by the fire in the current turbulent times. Federalism can work only when there is a strong sense of unity underlying the diverse constituents. Even when the constituents of the federation continue to protect their interests, there must be an underlying will to subordinate one's short-term interest to the long-term interest of the country. If federalism has to succeed, an irrepressible sense of national integrity must dominate to make federalism work. As the Mahabharata said long ago, there was a situation where the Pandavas were staying in the forest and Duryodhana came there flaunting his wealth to make them jealous. He had an altercation with some Gandharva who caught hold of him, beat him up, tied him and took him away. One of the people came, ran to Pandavas and said, "Hey, Duryodhana has been taken away." So Bhima said, "Sarus him right, let him hang himself." But Dhritarashtra said, "No, that is not proper." And this is what the Mahabharata says. Paraspara virodhetu vayam panchacha te shatam. Anyaik sakam virodhetu vayam panchadhikam shatam. If there is a dispute amongst us, then we are 5, that is Pandavas are 5 and the Kauravas are 100. But if there is an external dispute, we are 105 and whoever is the enemy has to be fought. This is precisely what is missing today. You may have difference thanks to the politicization of the various states into different political entities. You may have difference on various issues. You may not like the manner in which things are said, done in the states. But if it's a national interest, all of us must recognize that. Anyai sakam virodhetu vayam panchadhikam shatam. Unless we can reverberate Allama Iqbal's Hindi hai hum, watan hai Hindustan hamara, there is, and voluntarily subordinate all local dissensions, disputes and differences to the country's interest, we shall have proved right the critics of our experiment in federation. We need to look and think beyond federalism toward the larger interest of the country, which lies in cooperative federalism. That more than the machinery provided in the Constitution would enable us to revive and abidingly re-establish the true spirit of federalism. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience.
Thank you very much, Justice Srikrishna, for reminding us of the deep roots of the term. We'll now throw it open to the audience and have a Q&A session, which Orgo Sengupta will anchor.
Thank you, Justice Srikrishna. I think there was many interesting thoughts, but one I picked up on, which I thought was rather thought-provoking, was the fact that perhaps the secret to our success as a cooperative federal endeavor lies in our unitariness. And I think that's a bit of a paradox. I think I'd like to start off this sort of very brief sort of questioning with this, as in how much do you think the fact that we are a center-heavy federation is responsible for this point that you made, that though ungainly and inelegant, we are still surviving as a union. So is the trick to our success as a federal state our unitariness rather than our federal nature?
Somebody said very pejoratively that Indians survive on Jugaad. This is Jugaad which has survived your federal state. Strictly speaking, and the Supreme Court has analyzed it beautifully, it is a unitary constitution. But as and when we want, we have been flexible, we have made exceptions to it. There is no doubt about that. But then the question is, who decides when it is to be done and the basis on which he decides? If it is to be decided by the wisdom of a single individual, then we saw what happened during the emergency. Therefore, should there not be an institutional mechanism to say that this should be exercised only under such circumstances and not otherwise? Otherwise, it's jugaad and jugaad, nothing else.
Sir, if there is a direction from the Prime Minister's office to keep one office in each state capital, and Prime Minister will give directions from time to time, will it fall within the ambit?
This deals only with legislation passed by Parliament. This is a pure executive act.
But there was some opposition from some of the
This
states.
is the problem. There is opposition. Why? Because center is asking me to do it. He is asking you to do it for some good thing, no? To make sure that all the things are done on time. No. Center asked me, there must be an opposition. That is why I said what is required is, the key word is cooperative. Federalism itself has an inbuilt cooperation. But we are saying, at the risk of gilding the lily, there must be cooperative federalism. Why is he doing it? He is not doing it because he wants to run some personal agenda. He wants to make sure that the schemes, projects are brought to fruition in good time, and they just don't get wasted away amongst the maze of state bureaucracy. That's the whole idea.
Excuse me, sir. I have a question. Eurozone crisis. Eurozone is also a kind of federation. There are many crises: economic crisis, political crisis, as we are seeing the migration problem, Eurozone, and debt issue. So, what is the lesson for India from the Eurozone in it?
See, crisis has not been on account of governance. Crisis has been on account of fiscal profligacy. Now, if you have fiscal profligacy in India too, with your unitary thing also, you're going to have a crisis in India. Now, the FRBM Act was intended to ensure that at all levels there is no financial profligacy. What Dr. Reddy said is right. The Finance Commission ensures that there is no arbitrariness in allocation of resources. The famous Ganguly formula still operates. Maybe the Ganguly formula will be changed sometime later on, and Dr. Reddy formula might come into existence. But there must be a methodology by which it must be done. Otherwise, you are going to have crisis on your hand. Now, the reasons for the crisis in the euro area was much more than mere, not merely because of federal structure.
Countries, there is an issue. And
Yes, sir. Possible.
second issue is that, sir, we see from the start of the formation of this federation, some norms of the fiscal prudence were lowered in order to accommodate the debt-ridden countries. It was clear from the start, the Italy, Spain, the Greece, they were not the physically prudent countries. So the key norms like the GDP, CAD ratio, debt to GDP ratio, that all were lowered in just in order to political pressure to accommodate the debt-ridden countries. So we see there was not an element of sustainability from the start. Now the issues has emerging.
Your argument is like this. Somebody married and his marriage was a disaster. Therefore, I should not marry. Let's look at it theoretically. Marriage is good. It all depends on how each husband cooperates with wife. Marriages end in divorce. I have been married for almost 50 years and I am very happy. It's a question of how you make sure that it works. Now, if wealthy countries say, no, we will not give you. If tomorrow Tamil Nadu says, center wants it, no, we will not give you. Maharashtra says, no, we will not give you. Nothing will work in this country also. Therefore, cooperative is the key word. What is necessary? National interest, well, I am willing to give you.
We've got one
That's
question.
the whole idea.
Ah.
Yes.
We've got one from there and then
Yeah.
two from
Yes.
Okay. Hi, sir. Good evening. So the Niti Aayog was created, to replace the Planning Commission, but has also arguably inherited two of its biggest problems. One of them being that it has no legal basis, so it was formed by way of a cabinet resolution in the same way that the Planning Commission was, and also that it has taken upon itself allocative functions, which was not originally a part of the mandate that was laid out in the cabinet resolution. Now, what has happened as a result is also that it sort of started to eclipse the role of the Finance Commission, which is actually a constitutionally mandated body. So, what are the challenges, according to you, to sort of make the Niti Aayog or a body like the erstwhile Planning Commission a constitutional body and sort of defining a clear mandate in the Constitution by amending the Constitution, essentially?
Well, of course, the only thing.
So, but what are the challenges? I guess that's my question.
Somebody can go, first of all, what Niti has done, I have not been able to understand at all. Okay. Well, Niti is doing something, and if that something hurts you somewhere, the Supreme Court is very close by. You can always go and say it's an unconstitutional body. What are they doing? It's hurting me. Whether you are in Delhi, in the Delhi state, or in some other state, if Niti's allocation hurts you in any manner, you are entitled to challenge it by an appropriate process of law and say it's an unconstitutional body and I should not be subjected to this, whereas the constitutional body is the Financial Commission and I should be subjected to that.
But what is I guess my question is, what are the challenges to granting it constitutional status? Like, why can't something like the Planning Commission?
No, that is not possible. You have to amend the Constitution. And
That's what I'm asking. Like, what are the challenges to amend? Like, why has that not been done?
that is not being done because where is Parliament functioning? Constitutional amendment is a long way away. The ordinary bills are not being passed.
No, wait, excuse me. We'll just take it one at a time. Yeah.
See, therefore, constitutional amendment is a solution. How to amend the Constitution in the present setup is anybody's guess.
My name is Gaurav, and my question is, what do you think, what has been the role of the so-called national media in shaping up the idea of India being a unitary or federal structure?
Now, on other aspects of what the national media has done, I have a lot to say. Anyway, I'm not sure what the national media, some of the articles have, frankly, I don't watch TV, though national media means I keep
newspapers,
away
maybe.
Newspapers, yes. I read the editorials, learned articles written in either the Indian Express or the Times of India or the Hindu. And some of them have said precisely what I've been saying just now, saying that it is time to subordinate your personal ambition to the ambition of the nation. Now, if that can be done, national media has done a great service to the country.
Yeah, I just got two. How far has the All India Civil Services contributed to cooperative federalism? And B, don't you think the nature of Indian coalition is a biggest threat to cooperative federalism? Because the nature of Indian coalition is very different vis-a-vis the West, where it's an aggregate of national parties. In India, you have regional-based parties, and they can bend the central government even on issues of foreign policy. So how do we reconcile this problem? And the conflicts are going to increase, keeping in view the diversity.
No, you're right. If you look at it historically, the federal system worked beautifully in this country because there was only one party throughout the country. And what could not be done constitutionally could be done through the backdoor method of party mechanics. Now, the situation has changed. Not only are there coalitions, but there are states which are governed by some party, which is directly in confrontation with the party at center. Therefore, all the more reason why there should be a spirit of cooperation. Otherwise, how are you going to do it? Now, civil service cannot do what? Civil service can only make sure that whatever is transmitted is implemented faithfully. I'm assuming that the civil service servants are all honest and they are dedicated to the work. Beyond that, what do? They don't make policy. Because the conflict arises in a matter of policy, whether this should be allocated, that should be allocated, whether this should be established in this state, which is my home state, or some steel factory should be opened there, or some atomic energy commission's reactor should be opened there. These are matters on which civil servants don't have of course, they quietly twist the tail from behind, I know that. But otherwise, basically they are not in a position to dictate policy. The policy is determined by the government in power. And if the government in power happens to be in opposition to the government in power there, you have had a deadlock. How do you resolve the deadlock? One is, of course, all the run to the Supreme Court all the time. But the Supreme Court is so overburdened that it is running the country virtually on various other aspects.
Two questions here, one here and one behind.
Right. is it really necessary for an intergovernmental, for a body which basically looks into intergovernmental interaction to have statutory or a constitutional recognition for it to be effective body? Since Niti Aayog is not one, interstate council is one, but their functions are rather different. So could we speak of some kind of coordination with policy body, with the dispute resolution body in order to facilitate cooperative federalism?
Frankly, the answer is very simple. If the central government just sends a letter and says, we want this to be done, in a spirit of cooperation, you say, why do you want this to be done? Oh, this is good. Okay, we'll do it. Matter ends. But if you are not in a spirit of cooperation, you will say, under what law are you asking me to do it? Show me the authority that you can ask me to do it. So the question is whether you are dictating that he should do it or whether you are requesting and said, Bhaiya, ye kar do. Hamare liye acha hai, aapke bhi liye acha hai. That is cooperative federalism, no?
Just part two of the question, sir. Would it be right to say that vis-a-vis, again, I'm coming back to intergovernmental interaction, that most of the intergovernmental interactions really happen at the executive federalism level rather than legislative federalism or administrative level and the others, or even courts or tribunals?
Yes, but even then, the chief secretary of the government cannot write on his own bat. This is the policy decided by the government as a whole. The government means the political masters. Can he write and say, "Hamare chief minister jo bhi kahe, aap kaho"? That is informally possible. In a meeting with chief secretaries, he'll say, "Hamare." You read that. What is that? Yes, minister. And yes, prime minister. I have seen that. That is possible. But can it be constitutionally said? Can it be said on a legal basis? It cannot. So even on a legal basis, supposing there is a requirement to be done, it requires some kind of a give and take. So ultimately, what are we all here for? We are here to make sure that the country succeeds. Now, if you don't have this, no judge of the Supreme Court, even all the 30 judges sitting together will not be able to help you. They will render a 500 pages document, which is their judgment, with 13 different judges saying 14 different things, which you and I don't understand at all. You come back to the same question and say, "Kya hua bhaiya, kaise kaam karenge?"
I think we have time for one last question.
Yes, sir. You mentioned about K.C. Beher definitions.
Yes.
The definitions that federalism is a method so that the power is divided between the general and the regional government so that they cooperate and remain independent. Now, cooperation is inbuilt in federalisms. Then what is the need of adding the word cooperative with federalisms? And how it is different with this dual federalisms? Because these are the terms which were coined in the early 90s, by the political scientists. So why the word cooperative has been added to this? Because if the federalism is all about corporations and remain independent.
I totally agree with you. It's as good as saying there should be a cooperative marriage. What is cooperative marriage? Marriage is cooperation of man and wife. Some things are added unnecessarily.
That is the headline, sir.
Absolutely. It's like a cooperative marriage. Of course it is. If it is not cooperative marriage, it will end in divorce. It will end in wife burning also. We don't want to go into that.
I think that's quite a sobering note. I'm sorry we can't take any more questions, but I think that's quite a sobering note to finish this Q&A, that perhaps this endeavor that we are engaged in that perhaps...
If you read the foreword, I have said the same thing. It is redundant to use the word cooperative with federalism.
Yes,
and it's inbuilt in that.
And I think that is actually the key takeaway, that perhaps cooperative federalism is more of a slogan than a normative framework. And in certain issues where it can be, we look forward to your comments on the briefing book itself. Just a very brief vote of thanks. So on behalf of the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, I'd first like to thank Justice Srikrishna for his deeply thought out as well as provocative thoughts on cooperative federalism, whether it means anything at all, and if it does, how that spirit of cooperation between the center and states must be manifested in practice. I'd also like to thank Dr. Ganguly for taking his time out and being here and introducing the guests. He's been a wonderful source of support from Vidhi from the time that Vidhi was just an idea. There are many other people in the room who I would like to thank, so please forgive me if I don't, but a few people specifically, when we conceptualized this briefing book on cooperative federalism, one of the key people who were involved in that formulation and suggested it to us is Mr. Sumit Bose, who was a former finance secretary. I'm very grateful that he could also make it, because we really thought about how we could go about discussing this issue in a manner that is meaningful. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues at Vidhi, as in who have been responsible for coming out with this briefing book. If you look at it, it covers very diverse issues, ranging from land acquisition to taxation, and that's because there is an enormous wealth of young expertise that's there as in the fellowship as far as Vidhi is concerned, and so I'm grateful to be working with such a dynamic team. And last but not the least, thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today and making this event a success. I'm really grateful, and we look forward to remaining in touch. Thank you very much.